Pranam to all of you. Today is a very special day because today is the Janma Tithi of Swami Yogananda ji, the direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna Deva. Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Today, I will read the life and teachings of Swami Yogananda from the website of belurmat.org. First, I will read the early life of Swami Yogananda ji. At the time when Sri Ramakrishna was attracting devotees, old and young, to the temple garden at Dakshineshwar, a young man in his teens, belonging to a neighboring family, used to visit the garden of Rani Rashmani. He had read of Sri Ramakrishna in the literature of the Brahmo Samaj, but his aristocracy and rural prejudice stood in the way of any personal acquaintance. One day he had a desire for a flower. A man was passing by. The boy took him for a gardener and asked him to pluck the flowers for him. The man obliged. Another day, the boy saw many people seated in a room in front of that gardener and listening to his discourse. Was this then the Ramakrishna of whom Keshav wrote so eloquently? The boy went nearer but stood outside. At this time, the master asked someone to bring all those who were outside within the room. The man found only a boy and brought him inside and offered him a seat. When the conversation ended and all went away, the master came to the boy and very lovingly made inquiries about him. The name of the boy was Yogindra Nath Chaudhary. The master was delighted to know that the boy was the son of Nobin Chandra Chaudhary, his old acquaintance. The Chaudharys were once very aristocratic and prosperous, but Yogin's parents had become poor. His father was a very orthodox Brahmin and performed many religious festivals. Sri Ramakrishna, during the period of his spiritual striving, had sometimes attended this festival and was thus known to the family. Yogin was born in the year 1861. From his boyhood, he was of a contemplative temperament. Even while at play with his companions, he would suddenly grow pensive, stop play, and look listlessly at the azure sky. He would feel that he did not belong to his earth, that he had come from somewhere in some other plane of existence, and that those who were near about him were not really his kith and kin. He was simple in his habits and never hankered after any luxury. He was a bit reserved and taciturn by nature. This prevented his friends from being very free with him, but he commanded love and even respect from all. After he was invested with the sacred thread, he spent much of his time in meditation and worship, in which he now and then became deeply absorbed. Yogin was about 16 or 17 when he met Sri Ramakrishna for the first time. He was then studying for the entrance examination. At the very first meeting, the master recognized the spiritual potentiality of the boy and advised him to come to him now and then. Yogin was charmed with the warmth and cordiality with which he was received, and he began to repeat his visits as often he could. Now, coming to the second chapter, Yogananda ji with Sri Ramakrishna. To the people of Dakshineshwar, Sri Ramakrishna was known as eccentric Brahmin, They had no idea that the eccentricity in his behavior was due to his God realization and disregard for this world. The orthodox section looked upon him with suspicion because of his seeming disregard for strict caste rules. Therefore, Yogin did not dare to come to him freely and openly, for he was afraid there would be objections from his parents if they knew about it. So he visited the master stealthily. But love, like murder, will out. Soon it was known that Yogin was very much devoted to Sri Ramakrishna and spent most of his time with him. Yogin's friends and companions began to taunt and ridicule him for this. Of a quiet nature as he was, he made all opposition with a silent smile. His parents were perturbed to see him indifferent to his studies, and so much under the influence of Sri Ramakrishna. But they did not like to interfere with him directly, as they thought it would be of no avail. Yogin thought that his continuance of studies was useless, for he had no worldly ambition, but just to help his parents, who were in straitened circumstances, he went to Kanpur in search of a job. He tried for a few months but could not get any employment, so he devoted his ample leisure to meditation and spiritual practices. He shunned company and liked to live alone with his thoughts. He spoke as little as possible. His movements and behavior were unusual. The uncle of Yogin, with whom he stayed at Kanpur, got alarmed lest he should go out of his mind. He wrote to the father of the Yogin all about him and suggested marriage as the only remedy, for that might create in him an interest in worldly things. Things were arranged accordingly at home. Yogin knew nothing about this. He only got information that someone was ill at home, and thinking it might be his mother, to whom he was greatly devoted, he hurried to Dakshineshwar, but to his great dismay he found that he had been trapped. All this was simply a pretext to bring him home for his marriage. He was in a great fix. He was against marriage, for that would interfere with his religious life. His great desire was to live a life of renunciation and devote all his time and energy to the realization of God, but now there was a conspiracy to frustrate his noble resolve. Coming to the third chapter, austerity and pilgrimages. The Mahasamadhi of Sri Ramakrishna threw all into the deep gloom. To recover from the shock, the Holy Mother went to Vrindavan with Yogin, Kali, Latu, Kolabma, Lakshmi Devi and Nikunja Devi, wife of M. At the end of a year, the Holy Mother returned to Calcutta. After staying there for a fortnight, Yogin, who had now become Swami Yogananda, escorted the Holy Mother to Kamarpukur, from where he went out for tapasya. When in the middle of 1888 the Holy Mother came to live in Nilambur Babu's garden house at Belur, Swami Yogananda also returned to attend on her. His service to the Holy Mother was wonderful. In looking after the comfort of the Holy Mother, he threw all personal considerations to the wind. For did he not see the living presence of the Master in her? Then to serve her with all devotion and care he thought was his best religion. Whenever the Holy Mother left her village home for other places, Swami Yogananda used to be on attendance almost invariably. Thus, in November 1888, he was with her at Puri, where along with Swami Brahmananda and others they stayed till the beginning of the next year. It is definitely known that he was with her at Khushuri near Belur in 1890 at Nilambur Babu's house at Belur, at Kailuvar in 1984, at a rented house at Sarkar Bari Lane, Calcutta in 1896, and at another rented house at Bospara Lane, Calcutta in 1897. Most of the intermediate periods of the early years he spent in tapasya at various places till his health compelled him to give up the practice and stay permanently in Calcutta. It is not possible to give a full account of his days of spiritual practice, for not much has been preserved. Sometime in 1891 he went to Varanasi, where he lived in a solitary garden house, absorbed in spiritual practices. It is said that during this period he would grudge the time he spent even for taking meals. He would bake some day pieces of bread for his food, and for the following 3 or 4 days these pieces soaked in water would constitute his only meal. During this time there was a great riot in Varanasi, but he commanded such respect in the vicinity that rioters of both sides would not even disturb him. But the hardships which he was undergoing was too much for his constitution, which broke down completely. He never regained his normal health. From Varanasi he returned to the mutt at Boranagar. He was still ailing, but his bright, smiling face belied his illness. Who could imagine that he was ill when he would be seen engaged wholeheartedly in fun and merrymaking with his beloved brother disciples? When the Holy Mother came to Calcutta, Swami Yogananda again became her attendant. He spent about a year in devoted service to the Holy Mother. After that, he stayed chiefly at the house of Balaram Bose in Calcutta. He was now permanently sick person, a victim of intestinal ailments. But he was the source of much attraction. So great was his amiability that whoever would come into contact with him would be charmed with him. One would at once feel at home with him. Some young men who got the opportunity of mixing with him at this time afterwards joined the Ramakrishna order and became monks. From 1895 to 1897, Swami Yogananda organized public celebration of the birth anniversary of Sri Ramakrishna on a large scale at Dakshineshwar, and in 1898 he organized a similar celebration at Belur. The success of this celebration against tremendous odds was due to the great influence Swami Yogananda had over men, especially of the younger generation. The organization ability of Swami Yogananda was also evidenced when a grand reception was given to Swami Vivekananda in 1897 on his return from America. Swami Yogananda was the moving spirit behind it. Now coming to the last chapter, the Mahasamadhi. Swami Yogananda's health was becoming worse every day, and his suffering soon came to an end. On 28th March 1899, he passed away. He was the first among the monastic disciples of the Master to enter Mahasamadhi. The blessed words that he uttered before death were, "My jnana and bhakti have increased so much that I cannot express them." And old Sannyasin brother, who was at the bedside at the solemn moment, said that they felt all of a sudden such an inflow of a higher state of being that they vividly realized that the soul was passing to a higher, freer and superior state of consciousness than the bodily state. Swami Vivekananda was greatly moved at the passing away of Swami Yogananda and very feelingly remarked, "This is the beginning of the end." The Holy Mother also said, that's like a brick falling out of the wall of a building. It is an evil omen." She cherished his memorative affectionately forever. Outwardly, the life of Swami Yogananda was uneventful. It is very difficult to give or find out details through which one can see his personality. Only those who moved with him closely could see something of his spiritual eminence. One of the younger members of the mutt at that time wrote with regard to him, "He was such a great saint that it fills one with awe to belong, even as the youngest member, to the order that contained him." Swami Yogananda commanded great love and respect from all the lay and monastic disciples of the Ramakrishna order. He was one of those whom the Master spotted out as Ishwar Kotis, or eternally perfect, one of the souls which are never in bondage, but now and then come to this world of ours for guiding humanity. Quote words. That was the life and teachings of Sri Yogananda ji, Swami Yogananda ji, the direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna Deva. Today is the Janma Tithi of Maharaj, so I have thought to share few incidents from his life and few sentences of his during his death hours, during those hours after which he left the mortal body. Thank you very much. Jai Sri Ramakrishna.